Here in a moment with our Working People Analytics webinar. Just a reminder, attendees will be in listen-only mode for the webinar. Please be sure to submit any questions you may have in the questions function in the GoToWebinar platform. Looks like we've got good attendance today, and we're very happy that you all made time to be with us. For those who may not know, Working People Analytics, or WPA as we affectionately call it, is leading organizational intelligence about a company's unique work, its people, its behaviors, organizational culture, and the relationships that create value and success within a company. It's a very robust cloud-based toolbox. WPA provides leaders with clarity and evidence for decision making about change, about optimizing their human capital, how to close the strategy execution gap, increasing employee engagement, improving productivity, and more. There's really nothing else like it. There's deep insight that's easy, actionable, and cost-effective. WPA North America holds this series of short and informative monthly webinars on topics of interest and features and facets of the WPA tool. Be sure to sign up for the entire series. The next webinar, as is reflected on your screen there, is Thursday, November 16th, same time, 10 a.m. Central Time in the U.S. After today's presentation, we'll take any questions that are submitted. There'll be a short survey that pops up on your screen, one or two questions asking for your feedback as well. So we're very happy to have you with us. I'm Tom West. I work with WPA North America, conducting our training and certification programs and supporting our North American partnerships. Stephen Smith is also on the line and is with WPA North America, maybe fielding any submitted questions. Stephen is an industrial organizational psychologist with a Fortune 500 HR and analytics background, and I'm happy to work with and introduce Kevin Schlater, who is president of WPA North America, part of the WPA global team. Kevin has more than 25 years experience in corporate financial performance, organizational leadership, and strategic planning. So with that, let's begin. Kevin, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom. And as always, welcome to everybody from around the world. We love doing these webinars. We like that they're short and they're concise, to the point, and that they talk about real application of things that are valuable to everybody in the human resources world, in the C-suite, and in many other facets that we share in these. To get us started, if you joined us last month, we talked about culture. And we started off with the work gearbox that we like to show. And this really talks about how an organization is at work. The human element of it, the human element is the humans coming in and working, and that's really the hiring process. And then really those orange pieces in the middle are how we create value, how we produce things within our organizations. And it's made up of those three primary elements: the context or culture and how people are involved. The big one in the middle, which is that body of work, which is where we're going to focus today. And then the support, how we support our teams with all kinds of things, from employee development, use of technologies, and the environments that they work in. So last week, I want to do a little refresher because it's applicable to what we're going to go through today when we talk about work dynamic, which can be a complex subject, but hopefully we whittled it down to some very concise and helpful information. Last month, when we talked about culture, we focused on how an organization's culture can be measured and diagnosed, and those metrics can be put in terms of dollars. And if you want to see any of those, go back to the YouTube channel for WPA North America, or go to WPANA.com, and we have those housed up there, and you can see those half-hour presentations. And we talked about an organization diagnosing its current culture against what its future or needed culture needs to be. But today we're going to talk about how we work within that context, how we work within that culture. And we're specifically going to talk about behaviors. we're going to talk about the how and how an organization works. So when we talk about behaviors, behaviors equals the how. And we've said it before on some of these broadcasts. We've shared that Simon Sinek is very famous for saying, hey, for an organization, start with why. Help people in the organization understand the why. But as soon as that's solidified within the organization, the teams and the people within that organization and anyone really that supports them, even external consultants, have to start with the how. How are we going to achieve our why? And when we talk about how, we're talking about how we work, our behaviors. And behaviors are the best predictors of whether we're going to be successful in achieving our why or not. And these are the things that we're talking about. And today we're going to talk about, in our work dynamic, the level and the measurement of collaboration and complexity of the work that we do within our organization. So keep how and behaviors firmly cemented within your mind. I'm going to walk through the following, the coming 3 slides here, and we're going to talk about some of the hows that we've reviewed in the past. And the first one is mobility. In the late spring, one of our webinars talked about mobility and mobility patterns, and we quantified. What I want everyone on the broadcast here to pay attention to is, and this is an important thing, is that there's differences between teams within organizations. This is real data from an organization, and they are 3 very distinct teams within those organizations. And as you can see, when we talked about these mobility patterns in the spring, we showed the differences between how team A, B, and C work, and you can kind of see that there. So that's one of those behaviors that we talk about. How we work, mobility is a piece of that how. How mobile do we need to be in what we do within our organizations? And we need to understand, as leaders, as human resource consultants and leaders within our organizations, that the way that we supplement those mobility patterns, for example, augment them or prioritize them, will lead to different outcomes within our teams. Another behavior that we focused on within maybe a midsummer, if I recall, was we touched on very briefly, and we'll focus on this in great detail next month, our value networks. In other words, what teams are working with what teams within an organization? How do they prioritize that, and how important is that to the success? How do we rely on each other as far as teams within our organization? And we touched on that, and we talked about how to measure the frequency, those high priority inter-team relationships within an organization, and how they interact, whether there's a lot of virtual, in-person interaction, or some mixture thereof. So that was a second behavior that we've spoken of. And then the third behavior that we talked about, and we did this just a few months ago, and we really focused fully on work activities. And these are the behaviors of how we do our jobs. Organizations have to produce all kinds of things, whether it's reports or new innovations or client service, sales. But how we do that is really encased in these work activities. So do we do it by sharing a lot of knowledge or skills, and what are our priorities? Do we do a lot of meeting and corresponding? Do we do coaching? Are we constantly working on maybe perhaps brainstorming, acquiring knowledge, learning, designing, and these types of things? And the reason that these work activities that I'm showing here on this screen are so important is now we're going to show how to categorize these work activities on this work dynamic matrix so that we can understand how we do a specific work activity. For example, planning. How do we do that? Is it complex, and is it collaborative? So we're going to take these work activities and plot these. I'm going to start on the next screen. So our work dynamic model really is built on a matrix, and that matrix obviously has a horizontal and a vertical plane. And on the horizontal plane, we're measuring our complexity of the tasks or the work that we do. And it's very important in an organization to understand the complexity relative to the people that are doing that. So their input and their involvement, as we say, is critical, because it's critical to understand whether these teams believe that they're working on, or what they're working on is highly complex activity, or whether these activities are pretty routine or not very complex at all. That gives human resources leaders, operations leaders, and other executives a really good glimpse into the window of what should be complex, perhaps what should not be complex, and how to aid both the growth of those teams and those people individually, or also to make sure that we're putting the right workload into those teams. And that's the horizontal axis. The next axis is the vertical axis, and that's where we talk about a work activity that we showed on the previous screen. And think of one of those work activities. When I do that activity, how do we collaborate? At the very bottom, lower left-hand corner, is there really no collaboration involved in doing this particular work activity? For example, think of brainstorming or planning or acquiring knowledge. Or is it fully collaborative? Do we do our brainstorming, our planning, or acquiring knowledge in full collaboration with others? How do we do that? It's important to know that the involvement of our teams to share how they're doing this is that work dynamic, and they are saying this is how we accomplish these activities, this is how we do them, is important. And I'll show you that next, because we're going to break this into these 4 quadrants based on that horizontal and vertical axis. So if we look at work that is relatively not complex and is really relatively not collaborative, or even really no collaboration at all, those are things that we start to categorize and classify as administrative. So these things are very routine. They're easy to do. They're relatively easy to understand. We probably can do those things while being distracted, perhaps. It's fairly routine because we do them a lot. There's probably a lot of formal rules that says here's what we do. So these would be things like processing transactions within an organization or sending standardized communications throughout the organization, these types of things. It's something we can do perhaps from our computer. We don't need a lot of other people with us to do that. And so that's what that quadrant tends to look like. The second quadrant, if we go up the scale, now these aren't highly complex tasks, but they do require a fair amount of collaboration. A good example of this would be project type of work within the organization, or project management. So we have systems in place, for example, to build a commercial building or a house. And in order to do that, we have to coordinate an awful lot of people, and there's a lot of risk to manage and a lot of systems that go into building that particular project and that have to come back out. So we have systems in place, we have to communicate and work with a lot of people and exchange information, but it's not highly complex, and that's that quadrant. The third quadrant is in the lower right-hand corner, and that's expertise. So think of work that really doesn't require a lot of collaboration, but it's really highly complex, requires a lot of judgment and interpretation and trying to connect value from a problem to how it can be solved. So that's really where we're looking at experts or expertise. These are the star performers who have a lot of experience and can use that judgment to create solutions for their clients. Complex work, normally low collaboration. Finally, in the upper right-hand corner, we're talking about innovation. So these are teams or groups of individuals who are working together to share information to solve and work on solving very complex problems. And this really is the heart of where innovation tends to take place, and it is this human dynamic. Now, if you look at this whole quadrant, the 4 quadrants here, you can probably start to see, and we'll talk about this at the very, very end, that there's some things in an organization that are very routine, and we can look at oftentimes those pieces that are routine as a way to use technology or even systematize further to decrease the amount of manpower, the amount of human power that goes into that, and allow those teams to do more things in client service, in innovation, and in expert work that builds value and creates revenue for the organization. So this is kind of a constant genesis. An example is this. Many years ago, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, in order to do a tax return, it took a CPA firm and its people a fair amount of time. Over time, algorithms and systems and computer technologies that were put in place made producing even a very complex tax return very administrative task. So what used to be a task that was very expertise, perhaps even innovation in what it was doing, has increasingly become administrative. And many of the things that we do, and you probably have examples in your own mind, where things that you used to do you would consider highly innovative, expert, or project, are now very administrative tasks. So it's good to know that because organizations keep going through this cycle within them. So now when we lay, and these bubbles represent, and we're going to show some live examples on a dashboard that we can share with you. Now when we put bubbles in there, and those bubbles represent volumes of hours of those work activities that we showed in the previous slide, okay? And now we can see how that work's being done, and we can start to categorize that. Now I'm going to get into some examples for everyone on the webinar today.
I was just going to add, Kevin, those bubbles really represent the data, and that's how data is shown in this module within Work and People Analytics Toolbox. And pat on the back to you because you did a great job running through the other modules that make up a complete picture of the organization at work.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, and it is important. WPA is made up of a few different modules that try and talk about these behaviors, but it is a very rare day when we look at only one of those models. We're usually looking at 2 or perhaps 3 of these models together to get a complete picture and a beautiful visualization of an organization at work or a specific team at work. So now we got to talk about this uniqueness. So when we look at these work dynamics, these work activities, and as we showed earlier, the mobility patterns of an organization, we have got to start to understand that teams are unique within organizations. So what happens sometimes in organizations is they will create standards, and it could be a work environment standard, a technology standard, a hierarchical standard that promotes certain employees across an entire organization. It's a huge danger because teams are extraordinarily unique, and I'm going to show you how right now. So this data right here is an organization. I'm going to go and I'm going to break down the organizational data into division. I'm going to show you here 5 different divisions for this particular organization. Let me collapse this right-hand side, and I'm going to show that work dynamic, which we just showed to you on the live dashboard here.
I think it deserves pointing out, Kevin, that this is live WPA dashboard, so this is in the cloud, and you're getting a look at the dashboard and the interactivity of some of these visual models while Kevin sorts through some anonymized client data.
That's right. So what I want everyone to focus on here is this matrix on the left, and it's the same matrix we just went through where we were looking at those 4 primary quadrants based on that level and that measure of collaboration on the vertical axis and complexity. There are 5 data sets here which we're going to swiftly go through, but this first one is division CCRC, and just look at how they work. They tend to be clustered in the middle of this matrix with perhaps a little bit more leaning more toward this innovative side. Now I'm going to change the record and I'm going to go to the very next division. This is the corporate entity now, the corporate organization. And if you see how they work, their cluster is very different. Very, very little administrative type of tasks and work within their department or their division, excuse me. Very innovative, focused on analyzing, coaching, planning, and corresponding in these types of activities for that corporate environment. The next one you see is very different also. This is the development team made up of 16 FTEs, and you can see they're extraordinarily distributed in the work that they do. And there's 2 more here. The next one is another CCRC, a different division, very administrative in what they do. You can see the work that they are doing is not very complex. And the last one is this shared support division within this organization. Here's the point, and here's what's very important about caring and looking at these things, because there's a lot of detail here, and I understand that. But what's really important to understand is that every one of our teams has different profiles. And if we are leaders or managers of these teams, understanding how our team works differently helps us ask a couple of very intelligent questions. Number one, is this the way they should be working? Is this where we want our time and energy and money to go? Or are there different and better ways to be working, and how should we support them with technologies, with access to other teams, and perhaps with the built environment or other things, training and development, for example. These are really, really important. So we're going to head back to the PowerPoint deck, and I'm going to start to monetize and quantify some of this for you. So on this next screen here, I'm going to show some data from a live organization. This is one of their departments. It had 60 FTEs in it. And when we look at that data the way that we put it together on the matrix, we can now see, and the data, the big data is on the left, 60 FTE. They're spending 135,000 hours per year in work. And now we can see where their energy is going. 17% to innovation. The reason that is circled is that this particular department was charged with being more innovative in the firm, trying to find new ways to serve clients and developing new products and service lines within their organization. And you can see that a significant amount of their time is still going into expert work and serving those clients. And a portion, 28%, and pretty high, is still an administrative type of task where they're doing routine things that they do not perceive as very complex or don't need a lot of collaboration to accommodate them. Very helpful in understanding from a leadership perspective whether or not we're going to accomplish our key strategies. And in this particular case, they weren't if they continued to behave and employ the behaviors in their organization the way that they were. Taking the same data set, and there's a couple of ways to monetize this, and we've done it one way here in using kind of simple metrics, knowing that we spend $6.7 million per year on the compensation of this particular department. We can monetize it, and we can start to see how much money is going into these different quadrants. And what this does, especially for HR leaders who want to communicate, have a seat at the table of the C-suite, it helps them say, look at where the investment, look where the money's going. Now, in terms of ROI, is there a way to be able to take some of the money in one of these quadrants and move them to others? It starts the conversation at the C-suite level that we need to have strategically. So whenever we're looking at these different data sets, we have to ask ourselves these very strategic questions. We have to ask when we're looking at them, are these behaviors that we're employing correct? Is this where we really intend and want the energy of our teams or our organizations to go? Is this really and truly a wise use of our money? And monetizing these things is very simple. It's easy to do, and it's easy to talk about them in corporate meetings and in the rooms where leadership are making decisions about how to deploy resources within their organization. Money always captures everyone's attention. I have a finance background, so I understand what that means in terms of the human equation. And remember, money doesn't mean that we're trying to strip things away and reduce costs. It means we're trying to decide where we want to invest for the future of our organization. And finally, another big strategic question is, are these behaviors that we've shown you today and that we've shown you over the past year, are these behaviors aligned to our mission, strategies, and vision? And these questions really start to create clear answers about the deployment of resources such as time, energy, and money in these organizations into who needs training, who needs further coaching and development, and how do these teams need this to happen? If teams are not acting in the right way, or if they are acting in the right way and we want to motivate that even more, can we evolve those teams in some way by interchanging people, by giving them different opportunities, or perhaps changing leaders and teams within our organization to capture the why that we're all trying to pursue on a day-to-day basis? Perhaps another opportunity that creates clear answers when you look at this data is we need to evolve our organizational structures. We oftentimes see at Work and People Analytics, when we use the evidence and create solutions, and the clients create solutions, that they decide they need to evolve organizational structures. And sometimes those are very simple things. It's removing a layer of hierarchy or co-locating a couple of teams that are critical to each other in the production process. It also creates clear answers, as we showed in that administrative, about where we could put technology investments. So if we're doing a lot of administrative work and we have $1 million that's pouring into that on a yearly basis, and in big companies, it's tens of hundreds of millions of dollars going in there. It's very easy now to say, we have an ROI that we can factor in, because if we use a technology now to increase the productivity and remove energy and time out of that administrative and put that into client service or innovative areas in the organization, we now can measure that, and that's significant. So people that say that we can't measure these behaviors or we can't measure productivity or performance of these teams, they're incorrect. The clearest path to the profit and loss in your organization is understanding the how, which we've shown you today and throughout this year. And then finally, the last clear answer that's out there, and I highlighted it in creating this webinar, is understanding and building work environments and putting in place workplace strategies, workplace, the built environment, the places where our organizations work, which can be anywhere in the world now, we know. But this work environment creates that culture, and it starts to amplify and supplement and support the way of working in an organization that will meet the needs of our mission and vision and values of that organization. And the reason that I highlighted it is that my partner on the call, Stephen, sees and has worked in this a lot, and coming from the human resource world and the people world, he has seen the impact that a work environment can have directly on how an organization's people behave.
So Kevin, before you move on, a comment and a quick question. We believe, and we talk about all of the time, that work behaviors and understanding work activities and understanding the dynamic of work, the work dynamic that we're showing today, all of that has huge implications for organizations and their ability to execute. And as we've seen in numerous surveys of global executive leaders, the level of confidence in their ability to carry out their strategies tends to be very low, shockingly low. In other words, they don't believe they can do what they need to do in order to be able to compete. Do you think that this may be the reason why?
Yeah, it's a direct contributor to it. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, and that's a really good point that you make in a question that you ask. Yeah, and it's a very simple answer, and the answer is yes. You outlined it very well, Tom. So I think the last thing that we want to go through, as we're kind of running up on our half hour this month, is talking about this work dynamic, and what we've been talking a little bit about is transferring this energy of work. And so what we do see organizations doing consistently, and this is a revolving door, things that humans create, we quickly try and mechanize and put into a system, and then eventually, oftentimes, a technology or a computer, to increase the quality control, the efficiency, and the scalability of that. This is an ongoing search, and so we have to continue to try and do this. We want to try and continue to take what is administrative hours and time and energy and try and figure out ways to make that administrative work well and push all of this energy in this human element out into these other areas, into project work and client service, into innovating new products, ideas for our organizations that can take out into the marketplace, and then applying those in expert ways to our clients. And so that's why categorizing and understanding our work dynamic is so valuable to an organization. And we've seen huge corporate entities that are sitting on volumes of money, real money in terms of compensation and the energy that goes into that organization in these administrative areas, or perhaps other areas where the team is not working in the way that they should be working. And this is important because we've seen and continue to see every day that there's a huge opportunity of money sitting within these organizations. And but for just a small behavior change through a training and development program, adding a new technology, or perhaps changing the work environment, we can change the behaviors of these teams, and that becomes exponential because these teams and the people within them see and feel opportunity, they get excited, and they continue to create and ratify and validate and move forward the culture of those organizations. And these are the organizations that win, and win a lot. So that's the information we want to share this week. Tom, if you want to help close us out a little bit.
Sure. Well, just a final thought. We say with regard to WPA, Working People Analytics provides evidence, real data that is objective and is collected from the front lines about work, but that aids decision making, aids leaders who need that evidence so that they don't have to guess anymore. Maybe your final comment on that before we end.
Again, Tom, I think you kind of outlined it really quite well for everybody. So I don't really have anything to add to that because I think you're spot on.
Well, I think it's critically important also, and in order to have us wrap up, I guess, and keep this short and live up to our promise, we'll end there for today. We greatly appreciate all of you making time in your day to join us. We do hope that this was informative and useful information. And as Mark Twain's quote there on the screen points out, we believe it's wiser to find out than suppose. Having data and evidence for decision making should aid leaders so that they don't have to guess. Thank you very much for your participation. Thanks for joining us. Our next webinar will be next month, November 16th, on a Thursday again, and we're going to talk about another model within WPA, the Value Networks analysis, and we hope that you'll join us for that. Please fill out the survey that pops on your screen at the close of the webinar, and we hope that you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.